Hi, and welcome to episode 252 of the Untethered podcast. Today we have Tiffany Zilberman joining us, and Tiffany is a graduate of the Cath School of Yeshiva University in 2018. She has since worked as a speech-language pathologist, treating individuals across all age groups and various settings, including pediatric private practices and adult care centers. As her career continued, she began envisioning the possibility of owning her own practice. Organically, her interests shifted towards pediatric feeding, especially after the birth of her daughter about 2 years ago. She continued to build out her pediatric experience and graduated from Feed the Peds training, which confirmed that this was the right switch for her by going into depth in pediatric feeding. This past summer, she gave birth to twins, gaining personal experience of the unique challenges of feeding multiples and having a twin in the NICU. Most recently, her family and Tiffany relocated to Florida, where she has fulfilled her dream of opening her own private practice called Little Eaters LLC. Quick disclaimer, all information, content, and material of this podcast are the opinions of the speakers and is for the informational purpose only and not intended to serve as a substitute for the consultation, diagnosis, and/or medical treatment of a qualified healthcare provider. Welcome to the Untethered podcast. I am your host, Hallie. I'm a certified myofunctional therapist, feeding specialist, podcaster, business owner, and mentor. This podcast is all about getting your questions answered and collaborating with colleagues to bring you the most up-to-date information in the orofacial myofunctional therapy, airway, tethered oral tissue, and pediatric feeding therapy space. If you're new here, I challenge you to keep an open mind and join my mission to spread this message far and wide. If you've been around since June 2019, thanks for being a loyal listener. As we jump into today's episode, remember to listen with correct oral rest posture. Tongue up, lips closed, teeth apart, breathe through your nose. Let's get started. Tiffany, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am excited to talk to you because I know from one mom to another, we have both had feeding journeys with a child or two. and it's one of those topics that I think is becoming discussed more, but maybe not always discussed enough. But before we dive into that, I would love for you to just share with us like a bit about your background and like your own journey treating dysphagia, where that started and where you are now.
Sure. Okay. So I started out really exposed mostly to dysphagia through the adult and geriatric population. I didn't really realize so much of it exists in the pediatric field. And then slowly, as I was diving more, taking more CEUs and educating myself and preparing myself for my current caseload there, I was doing research and I saw that there's a whole world of pediatric feeding, and it kind of, was present. And then I was also doing seeing part-time clients also in a pediatric private practice. So it was kind of like existing and, there. And then I gave birth to my now 2-year-old. And it all just came together. I started doing tons of research. I had so many questions. As I was experiencing everything, I was like getting more and more into pediatric dysphagia and more interested. And I was like really being pulled in that direction. And then I decided to take Feed the Peds, and that kind of like affirmed for me that this is where I want to go. I want to go, I'm moving away from the adult. Like I felt like at that point I treated from little babies, little kids to 99 years old. I saw the whole lifespan, and my heart was pulled straight to pediatrics. And I wanted to just do that, pediatric feeding and take it from there. Yeah.
I love that. And we talk about this quite often that in graduate school, like I was taught to work with geriatrics and adult dysphagia, and there was nothing surrounding pediatric dysphagia. It really was like speech language articulation, like a lot of, other types of focuses on peds, but nothing when it came to feeding and swallowing. And so, you echo that experience.
Yeah, totally. Also I feel like a big part of it was being a first-time mom and going through like the nerve-wracking moments of like trying to get a baby to latch. Is the baby gaining enough weight? formula, no formula, depending on how the baby's doing and is the baby eating, and all of this is pediatric feeding. And I didn't realize this because, like as far as as far as it goes for most people, it's through a lactation consultant. It's through, because we know about that. We didn't know, like no one really knows that there's a whole world of pediatric feeding therapists, whether, SLPs or OTs. So that was like a huge part for me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's again one of those things that we need obviously more SLPs and OTs stepping into pediatric feeding. But so now that you've had this experience in both the peds world and with, geriatrics and really across the lifespan, would you say it's very different working with pediatrics compared to your older adult population?
Oh my gosh, it's day and night.
Yes.
So it's just so interesting because I feel like a lot of working with adults, of course, and geriatrics, it's a lot of maintenance and like quality of care, and like let's get them to their best. And there's not a lot of movement, unfortunately, once there's a certain atrophy in age, it's kind of like, let's just do the best that we can and to keep them as safe as possible, and keep them away from aspiration. And with peds, it's like, let's build them. Let's help them. Let's guide them. Let's improve their development. So it's like, it's completely two different worlds. And I didn't realize until I started learning more and taking more, more coursework, and also having my own kids, and also starting to treat peds, starting to experience it, and seeing that like I'm really helping little kiddos like build tools for the rest of their life, versus like adults, you're kind of helping maintain where they're at and keeping them safe, which is super important. Not to say that that's not a value. It's incredibly important. But my heart was pulled to the peds part of dysphagia versus the adults part.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I totally get that. And you really spoke to it in that it's night and day. It's totally different. And, we're not necessarily teaching compensation regularly to pediatrics. We're really teaching them skills, foundational skills that
Yeah.
maybe they don't have, or helping to kind of like get them or keep them on like a developmental trajectory that's going to help them develop an adult like rotary too. Or, it's like, so it is so
Totally.
different when you're kind of habilitating versus like rehabilitating. And some kids,
Mm-hmm.
there's rehab involved too. I don't want to
Of course.
downplay that either. But really just setting them up for life. And I think that's that whole conversation of like early intervention, and like the younger we get in there, the easier it is to address these things, the easier it is to undo certain patterns, because there's fewer of them and there's fewer layers to the onion or the snowball or whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
And it's just it feels hard, I think, when you're in it as a parent and even as a therapist, but it's so much easier than several years down the road.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course. Of course. And I feel like there's a big missing component of like mothers having these tools beforehand, before they give birth, before they have these little ones. Like I had twins 5 months ago, and I already have a toddler at home, and having these tools as a pediatric, feeding therapist already in my back pocket, I was able to like understand what was going on despite postpartum recovery and sleep deprivation and like all these things. And I keep thinking about like those moms who just don't have these tools, are so nervous, recovering from birth. It's like it's a whole experience. And then on top of that, you're like given this little child to take care of, this little baby, and like they don't have any good guidance. And this is what I was like, hey, I want to get right in there, and I want to help moms exactly like me go through this experience and help them and guide them. And yeah.
I love that. Well, I want to talk about a timeline here, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, so
Yeah.
you have
Yeah.
a toddler. A couple of years ago, you have a toddler, and that was your daughter. And you,
Yeah.
at that point, you were still working with adults, right? Adult like dysphagia.
Yeah, I was still working. Yeah, I was still working with adults. I was doing pediatrics in a private practice on the side, so kind of like two part-time jobs together, me full-time. And I was exploring the whole experience of pediatric feeding with my daughter from like, breastfeeding, latching, then introducing solids, the whole experience, like doing tons of research, what's the appropriate time. And a lot of times, like pediatricians, which I have a lot to say about that also for my twins, but like pediatricians, I feel like a lot of the responses are more like generic and don't like they're not customized to like what the struggle is that the parent is going through. And I think it could be that there's just not enough exposure for those pediatricians to like be like, okay, I am a resource in the community, which is like my goal. I'm gonna be going to a few doctors' offices soon and like sending them all my stuff because I feel like they don't know where to send out to, or maybe like these resources aren't as well known.
And maybe they
So
also
like,
don't
yeah,
realize when there's enough of an issue that they should even be referring. Because, at the
that's
end of the day, like pediatricians, we love our pediatricians, but they're not feeding therapists. They're not feeding, they're not
totally.
specialized in feeding. And I think, there are some who will take courses just to better their knowledge. But I think that
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
we have this conversation where I'm like, it falls on us, unfortunately, to go and educate and say, hey, when you have a baby where mom is saying X, Y, and Z, like that's a referral. When you have a baby where this is happening and they've now come to you for 2 appointments in a row and things are not improving, that's a
Yeah.
referral. When you have a baby, it's like in giving them actual like specific scenarios and like checklists almost, I think like that's the best we can do because I feel like, pediatricians are in and out as fast as they're in and
In
out.
and
And there's
out.
so much they have
Totally.
to check. And like, but it's so frustrating, right? For us as like the feeding therapists who are like, oh gosh, this baby should have been referred so
Yeah,
long ago.
right. Like if only I met this baby a year and a half ago, this would have
Yeah.
been, this toddler now, like a year and a half ago, this would have been so different.
Wow.
But, we take what we get and we work with, and we start building steps from there. But anyway, back to the timeline.
Yeah. So you have
So I
twins
had,
and you
yeah.
started a private practice. Which one happened first?
What came first, the chicken or the egg? So first, I finished Feed the Peds in April, and then I envisioned my goal was that I'm going to start my private practice. I don't know exactly when and how things will fall into place, but I kept like envisioning it, and I wanted to specialize in pediatric feeding. It was like the thought was set, and I was like, okay, but first I need to like give birth to 2 babies and like recover. Yeah, yeah. And like recover and readjust to like my whole dynamic of going from, a parent to one to a parent of 3 and like leaping to there,
Overnight,
to
no
there.
big deal.
Yeah, legit. So I had twins. I went past due with twins, which was like crazy. I thought it was wild. I gave birth 38 weeks in a few days, and 38 is considered full term for twins. Um, and thank God naturally and with epidural. And so during all the sonograms, they kept saying that the babies were about boy girl twins, by the way. They kept saying they were like about the same weight, 5 and 5 the whole time towards the end. And then when I gave birth, one twin A, the boy was 6 pounds, and twin B, the girl was 4 pounds. And I like immediately noticed, like the second they came out, I was like, oh my gosh, why is that one so much smaller? And I started, obviously, like any mother would, I started like getting really nervous. And then they weighed her and they're like, she's just like, she needs to go to the NICU. And I knew all about the NICU. Literally, you have a whole module on the NICU. So like, I knew a ton already, but still like hearing it as a mom, like I was obviously sobbing because even if it's best case scenario, NICU is NICU.
Yeah.
And like your baby's not with you the whole time. It was just like such a crazy experience of like having one baby next to me, one baby in the NICU, like a few floors down, and I had to try and latch a nurse with one, then get into a wheelchair because I couldn't walk so much yet. Get into a wheelchair, go down, be wheeled down to my NICU baby. Try and latch a nurse with that one, and like, oh yeah, recover, take care of yourself, sleep.
Right.
What?
Yeah.
I was like running for like 2
Non-stop.
days in the hospital. It was wild. And then so my baby in the NICU, they both have lip ties. And I noticed that right away. I self-assessed. And I'm even now kind of monitoring them for functional issues because that's like a big part that I learned from all my CUs and especially from Feed the Peds. Like what is there a functional issue? So right now, so basically the twin that was in NICU, she had a little bit of low tone and she needed to kind of like build up her muscle strength, and that was very evident to me during latching and nursing and even bottle feeding. And I was able, because I had all these tools, I like understood paced feeding. I understood like creating stops for her and like all these things and positioning, and that was able to help like build her up slowly, slowly. And then my other twin, he did great. He did great with latching. He had the strength and everything. But interestingly, he has his own thing. He has pediatrics, so he's like flat on one side. So now potentially suspected torticollis. So that's like a whole other experience. And I because I know of like the importance of a multidisciplinary team, I'm already in contact now with infant PT. I'm looking for craniosacral therapy to see, because I could definitely see that both of the twins have tension in some way, and apparently it's really common because there's not a lot of space, and they're all scrunched up for a long time in there. So like they're now here, and it all I would never up until this point understand that tension could create feeding difficulties for infants. So that was a whole, I'm like working through it literally now as I'm, treating also kiddos on the side and doing my own private practice. I'm like monitoring my own babies for all their, functional feeding issues or not, the baby who has plagiocephaly, potential torticollis, like there's a lot of spit up with that baby. And when I asked the pediatrician at the 4 month, right before I kind of started getting going with my private practice, she said like lots of tummy time will fix it. And I was like, okay. And like they're always like, oh, it's a happy spitter, it's all good, like happy spitters. And I'm like, okay, yes, like he's not like crying, thank God, like I don't see signs or symptoms of colic, but like I'm like, is this normal? Like how much of this is normal? And it's like having that like mom gut and having that clinician gut, and like, okay, we're gonna keep researching, we're gonna try and get to the bottom of it. So I'm still in the works of figuring that all out with twins.
Well, so I have a question now that it's been a month.
Yeah.
Is he tolerating tummy time, and do you notice it helping at all?
Yes, so it does. Okay, so my other twin also has tension, the girl twin. So she had a harder time with tummy time than he did. And at first she was like not having it, and now both of them are doing much better with tummy time. And I feel that it is impacting all the tension that's in this area. They're like able to pull up more, and stay in that position for much longer. And I've noticed that the spitting up has definitely decreased.
Okay.
But, and now that's why I'm like, and I keep thinking, so is there a functional issue or not? Like, yes, they still have lip ties. Is that something I want to like get done? I don't know. Like, I kind of, there's like this fine balance of like, let's wait and see or not, because I don't want to wait and see. And then like, God forbid there's other issues or like developmental delays or anything like that.
Yeah.
So because
it's a hard decision to make as a parent too, right? Like the clinician parent, like it's almost like you're like, I know too much and I don't want to decide for my own child. And so I love that you said like, you're kind of like, you're like reaching out to the team, the physical therapist, and like cause you're in Davie. So I think I've got somebody who's in Fort Lauderdale who may not be too far from you that I have to find the team. That's exclusively between therapist. So I'm making myself a note. And,
okay, good.
Yeah, and we can talk about that.
I just reached someone in Aventura. I was like, it's like I would do the drive if I had to, but obviously like my life is already so crazy. I need everything within like 10-minute radius of me.
Yeah, right. I get it. Like we drive to North Miami for the kids, like, dentist who we go to for extension. And I'm just like, I love her. So I do it. But like, it was hard, especially with two kids on two different schedules. Like we tried to like match up appointments as best we could sometimes, but they didn't always match up. So anyways, now we're kind of on the other side of that, and more it's like maintenance and, continued growth at this point, but it's hard. And you've got 3 kids, 2 twins, infants, plus a new business. So 10 minutes max. 10 minutes max.
Exactly.
So talk about the private practice, right? So you start your private practice. What is that like? Are you traveling to people? Do you have a facility? Like, what does that look like?
So my private practice is called Little Eaters. So we're doing just home-based visits, and I actually absolutely love that right now. I feel like getting into the homes of these little kiddos whether they're little, smaller babies or children, 2-year-olds, 4-year-olds, they feel their safest place is their home. Like it's, like moms, parents are there, caregivers are there, like maybe siblings are running around in the background, like it's home. So because of that, I feel like they already have their guard down, and I have to spend less time like building rapport and making them feel safe because they already feel so safe, which is like a nice thing. Cause then I'm like, okay, let's get started. Like, let's start different things. On the other hand, it's like cute and fun because like the other kids in the house are like intrigued and interested or popping in, or like, I'm treating a 4-year-old now, the 2-year-old's in the house, taking a look or like wanting to play with all my different tools and stuff. So it's kind of like, I love the homing feeling. I think it helps so much with kiddos, and, to help with progress. It's like a huge part, I think, that will impact progress is like going into the homes now. So that's kind of what we're doing. And I'm building my caseload from there. I'm getting right now I had a week of like a lot of calls of like, consultations with parents and a lot of unbelievable, interesting things. And I'm just like, whoa, you need me. And I want to help you so badly. Like, let's work together. And, there's almost nobody in where I live right now. I live in the Hollywood, Fort Lauderdale area. I don't think I keep Googling because I'm like, is there anyone else? Like, I want to know who else I'm working with, who else to refer to if I run out of time, because I want to help parents and I want to help kiddos. And there's really not a lot. And in my community, I posted in the various, I'm just starting like baby steps. So like I posted in just to like a soft start. I posted in like WhatsApp groups and stuff like that, like just community forums and stuff. And so many moms messaged me like, I have been waiting for this. I need this so bad. Like, I have this child, I have this baby. Like, can you help me? What do you think about this? Picky eating, textures, texture aversions, lots of picky eating. Like, parents really don't know how to navigate this. And I totally get it. Like, I'm a parent. I have a toddler. Like, I see when she has her moments of like, weeks of picky eating and like how to work through it, how to positively, encourage her and expose her, and it just, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's an amazing thing too, because becoming that resource for your community, especially if you feel like there isn't, well, if it doesn't exist, period, or if there's not enough of it, is so critical.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
this is like, it's one of my missions, like with Feed the Peds. In the very beginning, I wanted to start a Mayo course, and my good friend and colleague was like, we really need a pediatric feeding course that like really like goes over all these different things. And I was like, ooh, okay, well, I don't have like all that experience, which is where I pulled in others who have the experience so that we could kind of all like cover the whole,
yeah, for sure,
very
for sure.
comprehensive. And I felt like that was a resource that was lacking for SLPs and OTs. And it's like, if we don't have the resources, how do we even go and help our own communities and help the patients, near us? And so
Yeah,
I just had this big old vision that was like, well, if we can train, we can help like, bring the education forward, and we can have more SLPs and OTs step into like being, competent and confident in treating pediatric feeding cases. Like, we can start to make a much larger mark because, hi, I own a private practice, and, I'm mostly like up north and, Maryland, DC, Virginia area is like my primary practice area. And I'm like, outside of there, we get people who ask me all the time, like, hey, who do you know here? And who do you know there? I mean, every single day in
totally,
my inbox is
totally.
like, can you refer me to this person? Or this person told me to ask you who to go to. And I'm like, we need a directory. And like, but I also want to know that these people on the directory had a certain level of training. Like, I'm not vouching right
Totally,
for people's
of
like,
course.
but I at least know that, like, for example, you were trained and I can say, hey, Tiffany is in Davie, like, call her, and like, here's the link to her profile,
Hmm.
on our
Yeah,
website. And I think that's been the most exciting thing for me, is just like seeing a couple thousand SLPs and OTs at this point go
yeah,
through Feed the Peds. I'm like, wow, like how many more therapists have stepped into, like, not saying that everybody's actually stepped into it, not saying that every single
yeah.
person's practicing, not saying that people weren't already feeding therapists, but just to know that, we have such a growing number of feeding therapists, it was like, that's exciting because we have so many communities that so badly
Huge.
need it.
It's really, yeah, it's amazing. So also, aside from doing home visits, I'm also, state certified in New York and New Jersey because I'm originally from the tri-state. So, I have like the virtual support component of therapy that I am also offering. And I'm in I'm in a twin moms group on WhatsApp also. And there's loads of questions like every day, like about, tongue ties, bottle weaning, cup drinking, straws, like, tons and tons of stuff, developmental milestones, feeding, solids, how to, loads of stuff. And it's like interesting because, they post and like every mom comes from expressing what their opinion is based on their own experience, which is valuable and important. But I feel like I'm pretty sure I'm the only one who's like a feeding therapist because like multiple times I'm like, hey, hi, I'm Tiffany. I'm actually a feeding therapist and a mom. And like, let me tell you, like, not only from experience, but from like evidence, from clinical experience, and from, evidence-based practice, like actually how to help and what you need, and multiple times, or like product recommendations, this, that, like multiple times I'm like, hey, hi.
Please don't use that. Use this instead.
Yeah. And I also like, to like be respectful of other moms and other moms' experiences, and everything is so sensitive during that time. And like I'm in the time with all of them, and I'm just like, there's just not enough support. Like there needs to be. I'm like, I keep thinking like, after all my kids are down, all the, like I'm sure as as like being an entrepreneur and stuff, like all the light bulbs start going off. It's like, okay, what can I add? What can I start creating? Where can I get into? What community should, how can I spread more information about this? How can I help more moms, And a big part of what I want to do is like help moms in the postpartum world. Like it's such a sensitive and raw time, and it's so hard to think clearly and to make decisions for your child, and you really want to do the best, like obviously, of course. And I want to like be there with them and like, so to speak, hold their hand and help guide them and support them. Yeah.
I love that. And it's becoming, I think, a more discussed topic where like I talk to a lot of like moms even who have gone through Feed the Peds, who are like, okay, here's the journey I went through and I've taken Feed the Peds, and now I'm noticing, okay, we've got more resources for clinicians, but parents really need a lot of resources. And it's so interesting because I think a lot of parents have actually turned to like listening to this podcast, which it's very, it was never, when I created it, that wasn't my primary intention, but I love that it's used as a tool. Sometimes parents are like, oh, I listen to your podcast, and like, now I know like what terminology to use to advocate for my child. And I'm like, that is freaking awesome. Like, I'm like, that is so cool. But I do think we need like more of those parent friendly resources from like people who are in this space that can say, hey, this is based on clinical experience, and it's something that is very like, easily accessible and really speaks to parents who are like you were saying, like you're in your 4th trimester, you're overwhelmed, you're exhausted. You don't want to watch a 3-hour course. You don't want to watch a 1-hour course. You want to maybe get some like quick information in an easily digestible way that you can immediately take and apply in your current situation. And I think one, it's tricky because like, who knows what the right information is, because, it's obviously, we probably should be assessing the child directly one-on-one.
Of course,
in situations where parents, maybe don't know that that's needed yet, and or don't have the resources, like we do need educational information out there for families. So I love that. And I've talked to a lot of other SLPs, like, specifically like mom SLPs who have a lot of the same desires. Some people have put some things out, but I still feel like there's a big gap. Like we still don't have, I can't really think off the top of my head, like where to send anybody in this instant to get that information. Like I'll say, oh, go to my blog, but like, what you're going to have to like search and pass find stuff, and, or go through my podcast website, and it wasn't really created for parents. And I've now started writing some of our blogs, like, and I have somebody actually on my team who is a speech pathologist and myotherapist and mom of many, who is actually like writing our blogs for us at this point. And so now it's started to shift more to like that mom mode, because I'm like, really, this information needs to be out there for them. Right. Yeah. But like you totally like, there's definitely ways to create things, and, even with a fee attached to it, so that you're making some money for the expertise that you're putting out there.
Yeah, for sure.
These families can easily, access like quality information. And when they're kind of like, okay, I need more than the 75 examples I got from my mom friends, like, is there someone else who maybe can help me tell me like which way we go? Because like you said, there's valuable information in there. We don't want to be, rude. Yeah. Every time it's like, sometimes there's information that you're kind of like, I'm glad that worked for you, but like, how do we tell people not to do that?
Yeah. A lot of like, oh, you could wait and see, or like just a lot. It's so skewed from a personal experience. So, like, I
Right.
get it. I get
Right.
where the moms are coming from, and like they mean well, of course. Another thing that I'm like really going to slowly put together, another way to support moms outside of the fourth trimester world. It's like busy working moms that have lots of, multiple kids in the house. I feel like I've been getting a lot of calls and a lot of messages about picky eating, texture aversions, and it's like such a tricky thing to work through because it's really sensitive. Also, moms who like don't have a lot of time, like who's gonna have time to like do all this like fun food exploration all the time, and like, you know let's be real.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to have this like a lot of ideas that I'm going to start building the next few months, where I'm going to be running like food sensory play groups in the area,
Very cool.
and like for like moms to come with their kids and experience it, see it, have them, have these kids who are like, having texture aversions, and exploring those texture aversions, and doing it in like a fun, light, pressure free environment. And I feel like that's what I'm doing a lot right now with private therapy, coming into people's homes, and I'm getting really positive responses from these kiddos. And like all of a sudden the moms are like, he'll never touch that ever. I can't believe both hands are deep in jello right now and pudding. Like he would never go, near any of that ever, or to allow himself to be dirty, and like all these things. And they're like curious, and they want to lick it and eat it all of a sudden, something they would never do before. So I want to create that on like a bigger level with like lots of other kiddos, lots of other moms, and like maybe start offering these kinds of like play groups coming into daycares, coming into preschools, like running, they have like extracurricular enhancement like music and yoga and gym, and why not this be a part of it? Why not create an opportunity to enrich children through feeding experiences?
Love that. I love that. And
Yeah,
like as you're talking, I'm like, well, through like one of the groups, you'll also introduce like moms to other moms who are going through similar experiences. So it can also
that's
like,
huge.
further that community. I'm like, and then going into schools, when you said that, I was like, oh, yeah. And really, if you think of it as a cooking class, like there are schools who offer cooking
Yes,
classes, but a cooking class with
exactly,
a twist on it, where, it's a cooking
exactly.
class that's very inclusive, where we are, inviting children in who maybe struggle to engage or interact or even be around some of these foods. And the
Hmm.
expectations of what they do is maybe like, there are no expectations. Your child can sit on the side. They can make their way towards the table. They
Exactly.
can start to touch it. They don't have to touch it. They'll have a napkin to wipe their hands. Like, it's, like all the
Yep, yep,
different
yep,
things
yep.
where I think like the way that it's marketed in a sense to families, I think like if I did sign up one of my kiddos for a cooking class at one of her preschools, like way back when. And
Hmm.
during the pandemic, I was homeschooling my now third grader, but she was in kindergarten at the time because our
Hmm.
schools were shut down. And I was trying to be creative with like, okay, how do we meet all these like demands of like homeschooling? Well, okay, if we're cooking, that kind of is like a bit of science and math too. And so,
I love
I one
that.
of the really cool things was just by nature that I saw by nature of like her interacting with these foods. Like it was like me and her on a virtual Zoom with other kids. And like she was a little bit younger than some of the other ones, but I was like, it's fine. And we were cooking together and she started to try things that she would have
So
not
cool.
touched with a 10-foot pole. And like, we're like cutting peppers and she's like, can I
So
try
fun.
this? And I'm like, yeah, go for it. And she like eats a red pepper. And I'm like, what just happened? And then she makes this
Whoa.
thing with like beef, which she would not touch like meat at all. And then sits down and like takes a few bites at it at dinner. And she's like, I'm like, what'd you think? And she's like, I mean, I like it, but I don't want any more. And I'm like, fantastic, fabulous. Like
We already
that's a
huge
win.
fan. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and now
Yeah.
I have this kiddo who I feel like because it was a very safe, like exploratory and fun environment, like
Hmm.
she
Hmm.
now eats hamburgers and we just had she had like filet mignon. I'm like I'm like she's a kid who only eats like top of the line burgers and filet mignon, like she will not eat any other beef. She'll
That's
eat a
awesome.
beef hot dog, but like yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really funny like to see how not funny but interesting to see like how she's evolved and through what experiences. And I think a lot of time it's just the experience. And even then sending like, if, sending home something that says, hey, here's the recipe we made. And maybe even like a
Hmm.
little like note of like your child, you know, made the dough, didn't want to taste
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
they
yeah.
interacted with it. I don't know, just so parents like are kind
Totally.
of like, ooh, we could try this at home too. You know, I think that's such a cool idea. So I'll
To
stop
like
talking.
enrich, exactly. To like 100%, like being able to provide enriching feeding experiences. I feel like it's almost like the preemptive work, like so that you won't need, like so that they won't need, let's say, 2 years down the line, like, okay, my kid's literally only eating 4 foods now, or
Yeah.
6 foods, or 10 foods, and I'm really concerned, or this, or if a child is like, okay, they're not gaining weight, like I feel like we could try and step into the realm before things get to that end.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm like, so many ideas are flowing,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
you gotta put it all together. But yeah, I think that I feel like a big part of feeding therapy and being, a clinician, of being a feeding therapist, is to support parents. They're the ones that are offering these foods. They're the ones that are feeding their children, whether it's bottle feeding, breastfeeding, solids. Like they're so much of this experience, and like they a lot of times need a lot of guidance, and that's super important. Like Google could only take you so far.
Dr. Google.
We say, yeah, exactly, Dr. Google. Like, it's, and then I really, yeah, it's like to really be a support for the parents. It's huge.
I think there's also like something in it for the teachers too. Like I've done, like not that frequently, but in the past I've done some like in services, like the week leading up to school starting,
Mm-hmm,
and where I went
mm-hmm,
in and like with my OT even once, like we talked about like what to look for and what certain things may mean, and like if a child's got
mm-hmm,
food falling out of their mouth, and they're turned around at snack time, or notice behaviors upticking around snack time
totally.
or lunch or whatever. Like we just kind of had these discussions that they all kind of went like, oh, like no one's ever kind of posed it this way before.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I thought that was so fascinating. And then just going into preschools, because my whole practice is like home based, and going into preschools and everything for years, and having this really good relationship with this one preschool in DC, Addis, Israel. Their Gan Haled preschool is like the biggest
Mm-hmm.
conservative like synagogue and preschool
Cool.
like in the nation or something, and they've just like three
Uh-huh.
like floors of like preschool classrooms. It's
Beautiful.
really cool. And I, even though I was like a contractor, like, or my team, even still, even though I'm not there, my team is still like the recommended like practice, and so we're in
Mm-hmm,
there like several days a week. And it was so very cool to be able to just like plug in and go into like their snack times, go into lunchtime. And sometimes I would just go observe because I had time
mm-hmm,
to go do that. It wasn't like a time I was working with the kiddo, but I'm like, I'm really curious to see, now that I've seen them in therapy, like I'm really curious, like with
mm-hmm,
permission, of course, like I want to go like observe and see what snack
mm-hmm.
looks like, or go and see what lunch looks like. And it was so interesting to watch all the kids, but watch like the kids that were on my caseload and interact with the teachers and educate them. And it just also showed me there was such like room for, education with even the teachers, because they want to be inclusive and they want to provide these really enriching
Mm-hmm.
experiences. But then you
Beautiful.
have kiddos who are, honestly, it's like their fight or flight kicks in as soon as they see a certain food like be put on the table. And having rules like, well, it's family style kind of a thing, and we're all gonna offer something to each person at the table. And so addressing like really nice social skills and those types of things, very cool. But then I was like, but this kid is totally like not available for that, because they right now just completely shut down just based on what was
Mm-hmm.
put in front of them. And the teacher is not, they don't connect those dots necessarily, because maybe they don't realize that that's an issue. So it was
Mm-hmm.
also it was very cool to be able to go in and have these conversations and to support the children
Yeah.
like in the classroom even. So I feel like there's just so much that like can be done, and that we can be doing, and that we can also be helping like our colleagues, like the teachers and stuff, help them carry
Totally.
forward. Because I remember too, like when my oldest now was in preschool, and they would make like challah, or they would make whatever they'd be making in school. They had this little song where they go, mix it once, mix it twice, pass it on to Lily. And like, then they'd move the bowl over. And it was a really like fun, engaging, like no one
Mm-hmm.
has to touch anything, but we're putting it in front of you and we're mixing, which is fun. And
Mm-hmm.
now we've smelled it, we've seen it, we've kind of interacted with it. And now
Mm-hmm.
we pass it on, and it was like they would almost work the sensory system up incrementally just by nature of what they were
Beautiful.
doing. And then the kids, like when they got their own like little, piece of challah or whatever it was in front of them, like they were more likely to interact with it, because their sensory systems, their nervous systems were kind of like already at ease and kind of like, okay, this is new and I'm not sure that I want to touch that. It seems sticky, but I
Mhm.
smelled it, I interacted with it, and I don't know, we'll give it a go, and so you kind of like see their faces as they're like touching it.
Yeah.
And it's just,
Yeah.
it's very fascinating to see like a group of 12 children, like all have
Yeah.
their experiences at the same time.
Yeah.
And to go like, huh, that's really interesting. So all that to say, if anybody works in classrooms, I think it's also a really, it's a great opportunity to be looking at these things. And if you see a child who really struggles, like you've talked about, like who's struggling with certain things, maybe that's a referral, or maybe that's a, hey, how can we better help this child in the classroom setting
Mhm.
too, which I think,
Mhm.
just in case you need more business ideas.
Because I'm not busy.
So you don't have enough
So,
already.
yeah, no, it's huge. I also, in terms of like, as you're speaking, I'm thinking also about how like it's like another big feeding environment for children is in school. Like after, outside of from home, which is a big part, is like really they spend a lot of time in school, a lot of time eating with their peers and like having positive feeding exploration experiences with other kiddos and like like feeding off of the excitement together. I feel like can like set the framework, like create a reality that those kids can then take these tools and then at home maybe will not be as nervous to try certain foods, maybe will be more open, maybe will surprise their caregiver at home, like, oh, they're curious now, how did this happen, and a lot of times, like, as a parent, it is really disheartening when a child is like, I don't want to eat it, or pushes it away, or throws everything off. And like, then it's like, what are they going to eat? They're going to starve. Like,
Yeah.
they need to eat something. And then, you like default, okay, what can I give them that they will eat? And then it's like finding that balance of like, no, you need to create structure. You need to offer the right foods. Like, don't, not to keep feeding into this loop of like refusal and then offering the same foods that they do like finding that balance of like exposing them to foods and also creating safe foods that they do want to eat, like creating that togetherness, in one experience. And that like if they have the tools maybe from like a fun exploration at school, they'll be more open to trying out the foods on their plate, you know at home. It's like
Yeah.
a big picture that I'm
Yeah.
hoping for.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
absolutely. My daughter her school teaches Mandarin and Spanish.
so cool.
My 5-year-old,
So
my five
cool.
and a half year old in kindergarten, she has like Spanish twice, I think Spanish twice and Mandarin like once in each
Oh
rotation.
my God, that's so
And
cool.
she comes home with like recipes sometimes and she's like, can we make
So
this? And
fun.
like they're really excited to like do things at home that they talk about in school. And like she's 5.
Totally.
So like it's still like
Totally.
very exciting. Like preschoolers love that stuff too. So I love that, like, that suggestion, because I think whatever we can do to bridge that gap between their natural environments, like school is a very natural environment and home is obviously like the most natural environment, but also
Yeah.
recognizing, like you said, that a lot of children do spend a lot of time in school, a lot of their waking hours, especially as they get a little bit older, and they're not
Yeah.
napping in school, they spend a lot of waking hours at school. And, if not, sometimes on days, maybe more at school than at home, depending on,
Yeah.
how long a child's at
Yeah,
school
for
for.
sure.
So I think it's really key to try and always because I hear you thinking, and it's like very much so like, how do we generalize this? Like, how do we help bring what they're doing in one environment to the other environment in a very natural way that they're going to be excited about and that they're going to want to, engage in, like, without us even asking, really. Like they, if,
Yeah.
it's successful if they come home and they're like, I want X or I want to do Y, you're like, oh, that's carrying over.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Totally.
yeah.
For sure.
So
Yeah.
so you mentioned
Mhm.
that you, with your license in New York and New Jersey, you do some like
Mhm.
consulting. Do you do like any virtual treatment? Is it more consulting? Like, what does that look like?
So as of right now, I've been doing mostly like parent coaching, I would say virtually. Not like treatment per se virtually. But yeah, mostly parent coaching, which I feel like is a big part of it. And then
Yeah.
like, those parents kind of checking in with me every few sessions of them, feeding their kiddos, whether it's bottle feeding or breastfeeding or, starting solids, baby led feeding, all that stuff. So like, then they check in with me about how it's going. Okay, and I help create like where there's success, let's build from that success. Where there's positive experiences, let's add on. Like let's expand those things.
Yeah.
So it's been that virtually, and in terms of home, it's like like I mentioned, a lot of also building from the positive experiences, and then like, okay, this kid, this one child was okay with mixed textures together, whereas before it was like not even on the radar. So then it's like, okay, maybe in a few weeks I'm gonna talk to the mom and we're gonna create a dinner plan. Let's put one food with mixed textures, and the rest of the foods to be like the safe foods that the kiddo is confident with, and let's have them slowly explore those experiences from the place that they're already succeeding in.
Yeah. I mean, parent like coaching is huge. I mean, it's such a big part of what we do. And I
Yeah.
will admit that it sometimes is the trickiest part for me when I was going into a lot of preschools and like the families weren't there and I was interacting more with the teachers and then sending
Yeah.
home like,
Yeah.
a note to the parents and trying to explain to them, hey, this is what we were really successful at today. Please do this like over the next week. And
Mm-hmm,
our
mm-hmm,
families are
mm-hmm.
amazing. Like, and they, they really did what they could and they do what they can. But I think that's such a huge part that is maybe not talked about enough. It's funny, like I came out of the school system where that's all they wanted us to do was parent coaching model in like in infants and toddlers. And then,
Uh-huh.
I went into private practice and it was like a lot of the focus was all like sensory oral motor. And I was like, no guys, we need to have like a marriage of the two. Like we do
Yes.
need both. But I think that from, the point of like what you're talking about, what you do virtually for a lot of families, like if we can just kind of help coach them, I think a lot of their anxiety is decreased and they feel more empowered. Like I know you kind of talked to like really wanting to empower parents and, if we can empower them to just try certain things and know that it's coming from sound advice where like, no, we're not, what we're telling you is not going to harm your child. Like it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
okay. Here's how we're going to do it. Like report back on
Mm-hmm.
how it went. We will tweak it from there. And then really, like you said, highlighting the positive experiences. Like that's always been like one of my big, like, I don't know if it's like, if it's called a mantra or a value or what, but I've always said we need to build on the positive, like you said. And I like, when you said, I was like, yes, because if a child succeeds, they're so proud of themselves. They feel so good,
Absolutely.
like internally, externally, like
Yeah,
we get
yeah,
that
yeah,
feedback and
yeah.
we know if they're happy and they feel successful, the parent's going to look at them and be like, oh my gosh, you did it. Right. And so a lot of children aim to please, especially like the younger that they
Sure.
are. And I'm
Yeah,
like, if
yeah,
we can
yeah.
like intentionally set them up for success, like the more success they have, the more willing they'll be to take risks. And that's what I started to see in my own now 8-year-old, like when she was in
For
preschool and then
sure.
kindergarten, I was like, wow, okay, like she's so proud of herself. And now she was then more willing to start
Mm-hmm,
taking more
mm-hmm.
risks. And I was like, I mean, human psychology, right? But also just to actually play out, I was like, this is very cool. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so yeah, do you have any like interesting cases that you're able to talk about without, identifying the child?
Yeah, sure. I'm having a lot of fun with this current case. It's a boy who has, I would say, like just general texture aversions. He, after the evaluation, it was like really cool because I was like, based on everything, I was able to like connect the dots that he's just generally a hypersensitive, sensory seeking kiddo, and it totally consistently plays out in his food. From the moment he was basically eating, like he only wants hard foods, crunchy foods, lots of input, that all the foods that kind of give him input, refuses purees, refuses anything soft, and yogurts, like all that, like absolutely not, to the point where he'll gag. And, like anything that's saucy, anything like just, it was like a hard no. Um, and I've been having like a lot of fun creating like all these different edible sensory bins that I've been bringing, and the mom she's loving watching him explore. Like when we started out, we did like yogurt, which he will not like, doesn't like, won't really want to engage with or eat for sure. We did like yogurt finger painting and we colored all the different yogurts, and it was like this whole art experience for him, and also to get his fingers in. And I saw he was very hesitant in the beginning. This was like one of our first sessions, and I brought paintbrushes because I was like, no pressure, here's napkins if it gets dirty and you don't like it, because he doesn't enjoy getting dirty, for example. And he started with a paintbrush and then like got rid of the paintbrush, put one finger in, And then I was like, I was doing it with him and I was like, isn't it so cold that we were talking about properties and comparing it and oh, this is similar. It's cold like ice cream. Oh, we like ice cream. Okay. Just like having like a very calm, cool, like pressure free conversation about food. And then by the time I was leaving, oh, and I printed out, I spoke to the mom beforehand. So like she told me like the different things that he likes, like Avengers and, all these like cute kid stuff. So I printed out coloring pages in the thing that he is most interested and motivated with. And by the end, I was leaving, his both hands were like in yogurt. Like the whole thing. I was like so happy to see this. It was like the most exciting. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. And like he's experiencing food in a play way, which is like oftentimes parents don't see that as an option. Like you sit down, you eat, and then you go play,
Like we
and then you
need to
go
get
play.
messy.
Yeah, exactly. And like as a mom, like who wants to clean up all this? I made sure to bring a tablecloth and wrap everything up. So the mom didn't have to do any cleaning. I thought everything through. As a mom myself, I was like, I'm getting into someone's home. I want to make sure everything is like seamless and good. So I made sure everything was good to go. We wrapped it up and threw it out at the end, or like she did because he wanted to keep coloring this yogurt. But but like just making sure to give the opportunity of like playing with foods. Like even when the first time ever exposing my toddler to foods and to solids, and like a lot of it was a massive mess. And like my mom, my parents immigrated from the Soviet Union, so like they have a lot of like like a typical old school mentality, like what is this playing with food, like they should be eating and eating a lot, and and like a huge part, it's like it's about quality, not quantity. A lot of feeding experience and a lot of feeding therapy, it's about quality, not quantity, because the quality helps build and impact the quantity of how much the child will want to eat or consume. So like seeing that through my my daughter being exposed to all these different textures and playing with it for a few months, I was like, even I was getting a little nervous. I'm like, I don't know if she's eating anything. And then all of a sudden there was just like, I feel like a food boom. They have like children have like they start booming with language at a certain age. Like I feel like she had this like breakthrough where she was just eating everything, every kind of texture. There was like a certain point where I was like, wow, I see the impact of like the play opportunity, the exploration opportunity, then impacting a positive experience, even for someone so little, like a 6-month-old, and then all of a sudden they're like so curious to eat everything. So from that experience, and then also from, like I was mentioning, the current case that I'm having a lot of fun with amongst all the other ones that I'm seeing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but you brought up also another really good conversation just in that, culturally, right? Whether it's religious or there's culture, there's some type of, traditions or just something that we need to be sensitive to, because like my husband is Belarusian. He was born in Belarus. And, cool. I grew up in a Jewish household where we actually kept kosher growing up. I don't keep kosher now.
Cool. Yeah,
so, it's like the marriage of like these two backgrounds into one household with a child who's eating well. I'm like, there was one point where like we had family visiting. I won't name any names, but force feeding, and I was standing there biting my tongue, and I was like not working with infants yet. I was really working more with like 2 on up, but like my gut was just like, no, everything about this screams no. And they're like distracting her with this new electronic book they got, and it's singing and making noise, and and we're going to shove it in, and we're going to turn the page, we're going to sugar it. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I was like, all right. I'm like, I maybe not a lot of damage will be done if it happens with one meal. But after that, like I was like beside myself. And so I was like, I talked to my husband first, and I was like, listen, I really don't know how to approach this other than to say like never again. And it never happened again. And I think that there was also some like, I mean, I didn't want to be disrespectful, but at the same time, like I was just like, my child, she was a kid who would eat a lot of things, but preferred purees. She was a child who would eat like very tiny little cubed foods, and she was still an infant at this point, right? So, she was getting a lot of her nutrition from breast milk, but it was, I just stood there and I was like, okay, my eyes have now been open to an entire different conversation around feeding. And again, I wasn't working with infants yet, but it really made me cognizant and kind of just aware of like the conversations that I needed to even have with families to understand, like, what are their backgrounds? Like, what what are their traumas? Do they have traumas around feeding?
Totally.
Like, do their
Totally.
their experiences, their traditions, are there certain laws they follow? Like, what do I need to know? And yeah, it was just completely eye-opening. And she's the one who's now 8. But yeah, I mean, she was a great solids feeder in the very beginning. And then it kind of started to change, like as she was closer to like a year or so. Of course, when you meet them actually like eating solid foods, like,
Of course.
regularly, she started to like,
oh my gosh,
cut things out a little bit. She was okay. And then around like, I think it was 15 months, she had like a bad reaction to getting too many Vaxes in one day. And like the next day just cut out a bunch of food. And I was like, oh, okay, fun.
Whoa.
Super fun.
Yeah.
So she's been one of my greatest teachers. I will give her that.
A lot of life experience. That's what inspires us. I feel like as feeding therapists, it's like, it's the added element of like having our own little kiddos that we're exploring with, we're learning with, we're making mistakes and growing from, and like that whole incredibly humbling experience of having children. I also had like what I just described, my toddler now, like she was eating everything. And I was like, yeah, I did it. Like, and then she hit the toddler stage and know this and know that. And like, whether it's like wanting to establish, that like autonomy or like, the cheesing control and whatever else. Plus maybe she didn't like some things and now she's starting to have opinions on things. And I was like, what happened? It was like so heartbreaking that I'm like, oh my gosh, did something go wrong? Like, I don't know. So now I'm relearning this experience from like a new stage of my child, and I feel like it's so fascinating to like build on these different stages and seeing and understanding them from like a clinical perspective of like developmental milestones and like where we need to be holding at. And also now experiencing also as a mom, like, okay, now she's like really become a picky eater, and sometimes will like literally refuse most of dinner. And I really try to only offer her the food that me and my husband eat. Like, I don't want to be making her separate food, like separate meals. Like, I'm not about that, so I'm like, okay, let's try this again. So try to like, work through things. And something like, for example, like broccoli, she always refuses broccoli, like any typical kid. Like, why vegetables? And then I always put it on her plate, always, no matter what, and she always pushes it away, doesn't want it. And literally last week she decided not to eat the rice. She ate the chicken and she ate broccoli, and she asked for more broccoli. And I was like to my husband, I'm like, did you see this? Like, I don't know what to do with myself. I was like, so excited. And I was like, this is so important. This is like such a learning lesson for me. And I'm like, I'm so going to like take this into like, feeding therapy with the other parents that I'm going to be working with also. Like, keep exposing your kids to all the foods that you think they're not going to eat. Like, she said no so many times, more than she said yes. But the fact that she said yes was huge, like monumental, like for me, especially as a parent. Right? I'm like, now that she had broccoli once, like that's it. Like, that means that she would sometimes eat broccoli. That means it would sometimes eat other vegetables that we're going to reintroduce, slowly, because I see that like, we have to find this like fine balance, for her picky eating.
No, and that's exactly how it happens. It's that continued exposure and having it available, but not putting the pressure on. And like, and then I also like, she would, like, my own child, would eat something and I'd be like, do I celebrate? Like, what do I say? I don't want to make a big deal. But also in my head, I'm like, yeah.
Fireworks going off.
I'm like act cool, act chill. Don't react
so
differently, because if you get a different response for this food, then,
for sure.
Oh my gosh.
Sure.
Oh, well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. Where can everybody find you online?
Sure. So my website is www.littleeatersfl.com, and my Instagram handle is @littleeatersfl. And I'm going to be slowly building reels and making things and sharing what my experience is, and slowly building all these ideas. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me. This has been amazing.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. If you found value in this episode and want to hear more of these Myo-Tots airway and feeding related episodes, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and share this episode on your social media platforms. You can access free resources and all I offer at halliebalkan.com, or pop over to @halliebalkan on Instagram to get all the latest updates.